the first time, you're able to satisfy the optimality criteria. And so that gives the MC. For MMEs, we start from the other end, and we want to go as far as we can, where all the nodes preserve the optimality criteria. That means that if we flip the model updates up to this point, from this point, all of these models will satisfy the criteria. So this is the longest you can go in that model. And so that gives us the MME. So if this is the last time this breaks, then all these further model updates cannot destroy the validity of the expansion. So that's the, and so an interesting part here is that if the MCs are more towards the ground truth, then the MMEs will be faster to find, and vice versa. If the MCs are very short, then the MMEs are. And we also looked at a bunch of ways to speed up the algorithm in terms of approximations and heuristics, which I won't go into detail, and they're in the described paper. So in terms of empirical results, so the usual property holds. The approximate portion of the MCs are smaller than the exact MCs, which are smaller than MMEs, and which are usually a lot smaller than the total model updates. This gives an idea of the usefulness of finding the minimal subset, so you don't have to communicate all the model differences. And it also shows this property of the trade-off between the computation. If you are closer, if the MC is big, then the MME is easier to find. So coming back to this setup of model differences and the point of explicable and explanations, the next question we ask is, how are these related in the plan generation process? So far we have, in the explanation process, we have started with a given plan, and we are trying to explain that given plan with the process of model updates. So for the plan generation process, can we combine? So if the robot knows that my plan is going to be inexplicable, and I have to explain it, and there's a cost for this explanation, there's a cost for how much you want to communicate, so if there is communication cost, or there's a cost of the actual understanding of the explanation from the human's point of view. If you're giving them a long explanation, it will be harder for them to interpret. Right? So then, if the robot is to consider the cost of explanations during the search process itself, as well as explicability, it can achieve a trade-off. Right? So if it doesn't want to give explanations, it can produce explicable plans. Or if it sees that there is a possibility of explaining, then it can stay closer to the optimality. So from the point of view of the planner, the process is to figure out not only what plan to compute given a model, but what model to plan in. So the planning process is a kind of a meta planning process here, where the planner is trying to find out what model should I plan in. So here it's a combination of the explicability and explanation process. You are still giving an update to the model. So this finds the intermediate model where you are planning it. Given this model may not exist, you are ensuring that the plan is still executable in the real model, so that you don't come up with crazy plans that you cannot do. And then you're also ensuring that in the updated model, the plan is optimal. And then finally, you're trading off the cost of explanations, which is the length of the explanation in our case. So that's a proxy to how difficult the explanation might be to process. And the deviation from the optimal plan in the robot model, which is what you get for being explicable. So in explicability, you are being suboptimal from what you could have done. So that's the cost incurred due to explicability, and that's the cost incurred due to explanations. And so with that, we launch a kind of similar kind of search, except that the stopping condition has changed. So we no longer have a given plan to satisfy the optimality criteria. So we are ensuring that we stop the first time we find a model where the optimality criteria goes. So that gives us a new property that we can compute the plan as well as the shortest explanation together. And this shortest explanation might be even shorter than what we look for MC, because MC already had the given plan. Here we have the opportunity to find different plans that will compute even shorter explanations. And so with large values of alpha, so large values of alpha will penalize the explicability cost. We will come up with the minimal possible explanation as well as the plan. And with low alpha equals 0, we will produce the most explicable plan.
What's the most optimal? Optimal is
It's a very unique plan.
very good. That's right.
So this case might still involve an explanation, but it's the most that you can do in the.
Yeah, the most explicable I understand. I just don't understand the most optimal.
It's either optimal or it's not optimal.
Well,
Like in bold letters optimal. That's okay. No, I don't
Then it's
we're getting into the West Wing dialogues almost. Right.
Something cannot be very unique. Yeah. So do you have a guarantee that the explanation is the shortest possible one?
yeah.
Okay.
So you are also making the plan to make sure that.
So you have an optimal plan and the shortest explanation.
So, for example, in the original case, the robot is still finding an optimal plan, but there are many different optimal plans.
That's right.
And some of them might require lesser explanations.
Right.
Than
And so you're finding
in this case,
you're finding an optimal plan and have
and
this.
this.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great.
This is the most optimal.
That's the most.
So yeah. So coming back to the previous the setting. So that's what we did. So in the low alpha case, that's the case where we are not penalizing explicability that much. It chose to remove the double in the middle. And the high alpha case is where it produced the optimal plan with the two model things. Finally, we go into a brief description of a human factor study that we did to evaluate how these explanations are perceived from the human's point of view. So the setup is this. So we took the externals interface and we made a browser interface for that. And the point was to show different plans that the robot was suggesting. And those plans will show up in the human's model. So that's the start of the process. So that is the original map of the place. And then the human can either accept this plan as good enough or accept that plan as best possible, or ask for explanations if necessary, or pass if they can't figure out how good that plan is. So the first condition that we studied this was we switched the role of the robot and the human. So the human was the one who was explaining, and we were trying to see the explanations that the humans were coming up with, do they match with any of the ones that we studied so far. So the three different kind of explanations that we looked at, MCs, MPs, and PPEs, what kind of explanations are they using? And we studied this in two different conditions as well. One where the amount of communication that the humans had was restricted, and the other one where they had free-form communication. So that's the first case, they had free-form communication. The second case, they were told to restrict the amount of information that they were passing. So in the free-form communication case, they went for empty solutions. So that's the entire model of it. It's kind of understandable because the maps were not that complicated. So they just chose to give all the changes.
Just for me to understand, so free-form explanation is then just writing things up, or
they could write as well. So the explanation was in terms of the map. So they could annotate parts of the map,
okay.
but they could also write other things. But they had to annotate the map.
You have it actually over there, but I'd be very interested in knowing how this annotation is going on. If you could give us some.
Right. So there are waypoints that the robots could go through. So these are the small dots,
Okay.
and the goal and the initial state are the bigger dots. And then there is removable rubble, which are the I don't think there's an example here, but this is usually these colored blocks.
Yeah.
And then there is non-removable rubble, which are the red ones.
Okay.
And and the path is shown in green. So if you're annotating, then you say this path has a removable rubble, so you just put that there. Or you say that this path has a.
And this happens after you see the behavior of the robot, or?
Yeah. So you're given that this is a plan. How do you explain it?
Okay.
So
And you explain it by basically annotating the map with what the robot probably would like see or perceive, or how the robot perceives the world.
No, so they were given both the maps. So this is your estimation of what you know of the other area. And they have their own one as well. And they're explaining their plan, keeping in mind what they know of the other. And so that would include annotations, and some people chose to roll right now. And so in the limited communication case, there's an overwhelming majority in MC where you're finding the shortest set of explanations. So those corresponding to the MCs you will find if you launch the algorithm with the same maps. And there is also a little bump in the other kind of explanations, which is what Dave was asking. So one of the examples given here was that if I know that you went through a wall, then you don't have to explain. So that's a different kind of explanation than any of those. And on the flip version of the experiment, the robot was the one giving the explanations. And so that's on the interface, on this interface. And the
Okay.
yeah, and so the point here is to figure out if the given the explanation, if the human is making the correct decision. So the correct decision corresponds to suboptimal plan, an executable plan, in case of a BP kind of explanation. And in case of MME and MC, in case of MP and MC, those would be optimal plans. So we are evaluating whether they were correct. So they were saying suboptimal satisfying for PP explanations and optimal otherwise. And they were indeed able to do that for most of the cases. There was an interesting observation in terms of plan explicability and explanation as well, because some of the plans that the robot was coming up with were explicable, and some of them were optimal, and of course the human didn't know that. So there's a significant increase in the explanations asked for optimal plans versus explicable plans, which is also encouraging. It shows that to make explicable plans, you have to explain them.
What is the graph on the top right? I can't even read the axis.
The top
on
right
it, but
were the subjective evaluations. So the 5 questions that were asked were the explanations useful, easy to understand, and how they affected the trust of the participant. During
okay,
the
and
process.
what does the graph say?
And so overwhelmingly it's towards the positive. So they do agree, either agree or strongly agree that these help, and their trust increased during the process.
Wait, so what? I can't read what is on the x-axis. What is on the x-axis?
That's the Likert scale, strongly agree.
Okay, right. So that's the 1 through 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so there is no like surprising detail there, other than they mostly agree that it was useful.
Who are the people who participate?
It's random. So we send it out on CFC, and then
Yeah, so these are, but are they kind of students who have used the robot before, or?
no, there was no requirement on should be anywhere.
But still kind of students from that.
Yeah, so
Okay.
so they will be on the CFC emailing list. So with that, I come to the end of the discussion on the explicability and explanation trade-off. I will talk a little bit about kind of the ongoing work and proposed work that I'm up to right now. It's the problem of interfacing. So if you have these models and these different kinds of behaviors, how do you communicate across the robot and human? And so I've been looking at, so of course there's traditional modes of communication, so you have vision and speech and graphical interfaces. I've been also looking at the idea of mixed reality and brain-computer interfaces as well. To provide a very brief overview of each of them. So the first one was in the Cognitive Environments Lab in IBM this summer, where we are looking at the idea
on
of...
there? Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Right there. Yeah.
Why, you are not on the?
Yeah, exactly.
No, no,
Wait,
yeah.
what?
That's strange.
Now he's not going to ask any more questions from now onwards.
So the basic idea of this process is to what we call the externalizing the brain of the agent. So the agent here is a smart room orchestrator. So it views everything that's going on in the room and tries to understand what task is being done and possibly help in those tasks. The problem with the smart room agent is that you can't ascribe different observations directly to the agent. So for a robot, if the robot is looking there or is in this area, you know that that's what they're looking. For the room, you don't know what information is being gathered. Right? There are cameras everywhere, there are speakers everywhere, microphones everywhere. So the process that we're looking at is how do you have transparency in this process. So if there is a high-level decision being made, so at the top, the high-level decision is what high-level task is being performed. So that's the task-level plan recognition. What processes led to that decision? Right? So what are the agents? What they're saying? Where are they? What the agent is seeing? So it goes from low-level sensor inputs so what am I hearing? What am I seeing? To intermediate level inputs, which is what did I extract from this information? So given this is what I saw, this is what I heard, these are the entities that I got out of this. This is where I think you are, etc. And then from that, we can high level representation saying, given that knowledge, what is the decision that I came up with? So that's the process. I don't know if we do that. Yeah, the sound is not on. So the point is that here they're talking about a general meeting in the room, and it's trying to the background is trying to figure out who these agents are and what they're talking about. It's completely online and real time. And one of the interesting things is that we can't recognize who these agents are, which is a big problem with him. So he'll show up with a beard and without a beard one day, and then the system will go. So it's able to assign different agents to these unknown agents. So when it says unknown, you can click on these explanations for why you came up with these decisions. It will say if the unknown was this person, then this seems to be the right decision. So it's able to handle a bit of uncertainty there as well. So that's the vision and speech part. In the scope of mixed reality, the application I'm looking at is if you are able to communicate through holograms in mixed reality, what kind of different capabilities you get out of that in the scope of task planning. And the three use cases I'm looking at is this idea of disambiguating intentions at the time of execution. So say if you think that there's a set of plans that the human is expecting from you, and you're doing one of them, how do you disambiguate which one based on annotations you produce on the environment? So for example, if I'm going to pick up the phone or the bottle, and it's not possible to tell which one I'm going to pick up when I'm approaching this. You can put an arrow on top of the bottle that disambiguates which one it can be. From the point of task planning, this is even more longer term. So you're trying to figure out in the scope of these long-term plans, what part should I annotate to disambiguate at the time of execution. And then the interesting property is that if you can do that, you can put that in the generation process again. So this is again like the explicability and explanation balancing part, where you can actually produce longer plans that are easier to disambiguate. So if you know that instead of a 3-step plan, I can do a 5-step plan, which I can annotate better, then the plan generation process can handle that. So that's what I call projection-aware planning. So if you're aware that you can make those communications, then you can put that in the generation process. And then finally, the holograms themselves are interactive. So the human can come back and try to interact with those holograms. So the human gets to say, I'm not happy with the plan you're doing. So you can, in this case, it's clicking on a block saying do not use this. And the robot replans online based on the inputs. So, and then you can also have a bunch of different assistive cues that help in the interactive execution. So you can show hidden stuff. We can show areas of safety, etc. And then finally, I'm looking at this idea of easy feedback for task planning. And this is mostly exploratory work. There doesn't exist anything in the scope of task planning. It is not known what kind of signals you can get out of it. So in single step actions, you can isolate what discrete event you're looking at. So you can pinpoint what time you should look for signals. In continuous actions and in longer term actions, it's harder to tell what to ascribe those each signals to. So that's something I'm interested in figuring out if it's the case that we can get similar signals from discrete events to longer term events as well. And in this case, so that's on the left, and on the right we have this setting, an RL setting using the affective states as a reward signal. So the idea is if the model physics are known, domain physics are known, then you can bootstrap that with the preferences of the agent. In this case, the preferences of the human is that the robot doesn't use a green block, and so they're just an observer here, very enthusiastic observer. And the robot here is only getting the stress and the frustration and the happiness signal, which is extremely noisy, as we know, and trying to figure out based on that whether it should change its policies. And so in this example, it did start exploring new policies. So it will start making unstacking blocks that are already stacked and make, say, different kinds of towers, but it's not able to figure out the correct policy, either due to the noise in the signal as well as due to the representation that we use, which is not that sophisticated. So there's some exploratory work to be done there as well. So that's the proposed work for the rest of the year, looking at the designing experiments for the intention projection part, so we can see if those holographic projections are able to help the humans understand the intentions of the robot faster. And in the fall, I'm looking at this EEG-based feedback for the task planning part. So that brings us to the end. So in conclusion, we saw how the mental modeling of the human allows us to do this explanation and explicability trade-off, and how they can use this expected model to be closer to the human model or bring the human model closer. And human factor studies on a kind of simple domain showed that such explanations can be useful, and is what the humans were expecting in those cases as well. And the ongoing work is in, so while in the previous work we only generated the content for the communication, the ongoing work is about how do you actually do the communication part. So finally, a big thank you to my lab members and my committee members in ASU, IBM, and everybody else who is supporting this now. So, any questions now?
Okay, so there is
Great, thank
time
you.
for public questions, and then it will be a closed section. So public question, anybody, including the committee members, can ask. Questions?
So, in your work, you talk a lot about, and I mentioned MR, and you talk about the mental model in of the mental model of human, but you really haven't talked about where they're from. I mean, are you investigating like how to learn those models, and do you have any comments on that?
So there are kind of two parts to it, right? So where do you get those models, and how do you, once you get those models, how do you use them? And so for example, in some of the cases, that model is like part of how the domain is. So in search and rescue, you could think that the agents start with the blueprint of the building. So the model is the same at the start, and it's known. In the case of the fetch example, you could think of having the general expectations of the model. So what the robot does, and then the specifics of this robot are part of the internal model, and you know that you have to reason with the general model versus internal model. But yes, in general, you do have to learn those through interactions, what the human expects. Part of the problem with the model learning part is that whatever you learn will still be incomplete. So one of the words that I did with Sarah is coming up in ICAPS this year is how to deal with an incomplete representation of the model. So we show that if you have a model which says I'm not sure what the human thinks, so parts of the model will say that this is unknown. Then how do you do the same explanation process with those unknown parameters? Yeah.
So answering his question, can you not just say it doesn't matter really where it comes from, because you just assume that the mental model for the human is empty, right?
So
the human knows nothing.
Right.
And then everything that now subsequently happens is a model update, right? And model update is effectively what will give you the learning.
Yeah. So in this case, what we do is the empty model case, because and that's also useful as a process of visualization of plans. So if you're given a plan and if you're asking, if you're finding a concise summarization of what parts of the model contributed to this particular plan, you could think of that as the model reconciliation process as well.
Yeah,
Empty model.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
you always
so-
start with the empty model, and then you reconcile the
Right.
two.
So there are two caveats to that. So the empty model, it will take way longer to compute.
So that's a separate question,
Right.
right? It may, if you do statistical learning, may take also a long time, right? Because you may need many observations of what the human does or doesn't do, and what the human may or may not know based on that.
But also you will be providing many information that the human also knows already. Right. So
Granted.
that's actually one of the use cases in the ICAPS paper as well, where we say that if you are unsure if the human knows about this, then you can actually ask questions.
But I'm just saying,
and figure it out.
conceptually,
Yeah.
conceptually, he solved the learning problem, because the learning problem is really a model update problem, right, from a certain perspective. And given that you don't know what the human knows anyway, we might as well assume the empty, or some model. Actually, it doesn't have to be the empty. You could assume the identical model of the human and the robot to begin with, and then realize that's not true, right? Or you can assume the human doesn't know anything.
Right. So yeah,
Yeah.
so between not knowing anything and knowing the full model,
There's lots of
uncertain
places
model
in
that we
between,
do
yeah.
just says that we are unsure about these parts, and then you model reason with that.
Yeah.
No, sorry,
Go ahead.
No. So one question I had was, with empty models, you can't really fix the problems where human has incorrect beliefs about the robot, right?
So you can only do
Right.
what you know.
So it's
is
like
part-
empty models are always abstract models of the
Right.
thing. So you would still,
Right.
the humans will still have incorrect preconditions
Right.
and incorrect effect. Empty model doesn't really capture that.
But that's even harder to figure out if they are.
Right, but then you will still
randomness,
have
yeah.
to have some real, I suppose,
Right.
some interrogative process going on.
But yeah, but that process cannot. So the communication process that we have looked at do not provide that kind of update. So the
Right.
human has to come up with, say, I have a new,
Right.
completely new action
Right.
that I think you can do. Which is
It doesn't have to be completely new action. It could be just be a additional effect that the human believes that the
Right.
robot has. But again, we don't have a solution to that right now. Yeah, but for the empty model case, I would assume it's the same as having an annotated model where everything is possible and everything is. Well, that would be also noisy. That would also capture noise, I suppose.
I'll give two questions that I think are related. So you started talking about the question that a robot can face of what should I do next, but then went on to talk about entire plans, not just what to do next, but how to get all the way from here to a goal state. Would some of these considerations about how to explain a robot's plans or behaviors, or how to make them explicable, be different if you didn't have to think about a whole plan of how to get from here to there, and you were just thinking about the immediate what to do next, or just a part of the whole plan? My other related question, I guess, is it possible that the balance or trade-offs between explanations and explicability might be different at different parts of a plan? Maybe right now I don't have time to explain something to you, so I have to do an action that's explicable, but I might expect that over the course of carrying out an entire plan, I might have more time to explain why I'm doing something, etc.
Right. So so for the first one, wait, the first one was about so what to do next. Yeah. So what to do next in general, so that it doesn't have to be an entire plan. So you could think of a single action as the base case. So what to do next usually means it's the policy that you are following. So it could be just the next step or whatever your behavior is. And usually it includes replanning as soon as you find new information. So it's not that you decided this is what you're going to do and then you're going to do this anyway. So that decision is also likely to change. The specific setup that we looked at here is kind of offline. So you are given the plan and you're explaining it. So yes, so in the online scenario, you could think of explicability being also a function of what's observable for the human. So if you make a plan and you know actions, say A and B are not expected, but also you're doing them in places that the human can't see, so you don't need to worry about that. And so in the offline case, of course, if you told the human this is what I'm doing, then that's not explicable. And so that can also figure in the explanation process as well. In the online explanation process, the example that you asked was going through the wall. In the online case, you don't have to explain that. Whereas in the offline case, if you told the human, I'm going to go to the wall, then you have to explain that. So there was certain slight difference between the online and offline cases.
Other questions? Going once? Okay, then shut this off. Then